suppressing speech does hide the danger at the expense of increasing it. It doesn't reduce the danger.
David Menzies outside the Wellington building, where we just took in the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. And you never know who you're going to bump into, Ottawa. Here is a former rebel, John Robson himself, who was testifying at the committee. And John, it was really fascinating to take in that hearing. And of course, you said something I thought that was quite profound, that that there is not that censorship is an ugly word. And this is what we are seeing here. We are seeing the government trying to censor something, and censorship is an ugly word because censorship is indeed ugly.
Yeah, it's the silencing of opinion. And I made the point to the committee that you don't need censorship to have laws against incitement to violence. You don't need censorship to have laws against libel. You don't need censorship to prevent someone from shouting fire in a crowded theater or committing commercial fraud. Censorship is when you silence somebody because you don't want to hear their opinion or you don't want someone else to hear their opinion. And this means they're afraid that if Canadians hear an obnoxious opinion, and a lot of the opinions they want to censor are thoroughly obnoxious, but they're afraid if Canadians hear it, they're going to all turn into neo-Nazis or something. And to me, that's an obnoxious opinion. Have you really no faith in the people who elected you?
And also a point you made, John, is that it just further drives this ugliness underground. We can no longer use sunshine as a weapon against evil. And I love the analogy you made. This is akin to cutting off the rattle off the snake, but not draining the venom. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is I've been accused of living in the past because I was citing John Stuart Mill's On Liberty because it makes the best defense of free speech ever written. And you shouldn't be ashamed to read a book. You might learn something. And Mill gives 3 reasons why you don't silence opinions. First, it might turn out to be true. I mean, we've been surprised by a lot of things. It's not like I'm worried that online hate's going to turn out to be true, but once you start censoring, it's hard to stop. And the second thing is the sunlight destroys evil, the Dracula effect. If there's hate out there, you want to bring it in the open where it will wither and die. You don't want to drive it into dank basements or the internet equivalent of those where in the mold and the damp it spreads and becomes more dangerous. And the third reason is you don't want to have truth in your mind as some sort of dry slogan. You want it to be vivid and alive. And if you hear truth challenged and defended, if you defend truth, if you debate a racist, you come out more firmly non-bigoted. So for all these reasons, suppressing speech does hide the danger at the expense of increasing it. It doesn't reduce the danger.
You know, you raise a fascinating point. If John Stuart Mills was alive today, John, and he was taking in what you just took in 20 minutes ago, what do you think his opinion would be of something like Section 13?
Well, I'm sure he'd be horrified, and I didn't get to say this, time being limited, but Mill himself was arrested as a teenager for distributing birth control literature to the poor. He'd been the victim of laws that silenced opinion, and if he were alive today, I am sure he would be the victim of laws that silenced opinion because he was never afraid to say what he thought, and much of what he said was unpopular at the time, but he didn't care. He said it anyway and said, if I'm wrong, refute my arguments. He said, we have no warrant to believe anything, no matter how cherished, other than a standing invitation to the world to refute it. And that is what he would have said had he been there in my place.
And John, one last question. Certainly, you got some blowback. The NDP MP, Mr. Garrison, was basically saying that you're making light about what hate speech can accomplish, and you're not living in his shoes. He cited how he has, because of his sexual orientation, been subjected to death threats over the course of his life and his career. What do you say in response to that?
Well, I say nothing because he made a statement. He didn't ask a question. He didn't let us talk. But had he phrased it as a question, I would have said, first of all, I have no doubt he has received some very nasty death threats, some of which were probably credible, but that's a criminal offense. You don't need to censor speech to say you can't threaten to kill somebody. There are other things that have been said about him that sounded to me as though they were libelous. So there's a protection under law for all these things. But beyond that, you need to allow obnoxiousness in order to expose it and refute it and find out what's really true and appreciate what's really true. And part of what he was saying is that he was the first openly homosexual person in a number of areas. And the idea that if you stand up today and say, I'm homosexual, they're all going to shun you. The reverse is true. If you were to criticize someone for being gay, you'd get shunned. So he is the beneficiary of a process of free speech that has removed bigotry against gays from reputable society, and he should recognize that this wasn't done because the law, back when a lot of people were bigoted against homosexuals, said, well, you can't speak in favor of gays. It's because the law didn't say that. He's the beneficiary of free speech, and I would have liked to tell him that.
You know, John, what you just alluded to there briefly, we already have laws on the books, long before there were human rights commissions and tribunals, that deal with slander, defamation, libel. So it's almost like, I think, Section 13 is a solution in search of a problem.
Yeah, and what Garrison said is, we're not trying to criminalize speech, but we're trying to draw a line. And on the other side of that line is a policeman with a truncheon, a set of handcuffs, a judge, a gavel, and a jail cell, or a fine. And if you don't pay the fine, you go to jail. So he was confused. He was trying to criminalize speech, and he didn't even know it. And I wish he'd given me a chance to tell him that. But unfortunately, he ran out the time making a statement about how awful we were and how we were living in the past. Well, if the past means John Stuart Mill's arguments in favor of free speech, we need more people living in the past. Because Mill was right then, and he's right today. The internet changes nothing, except now you can download On Liberty online, and you should.
Thank you so much for your time, John.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And there you have it, folks. Again, another compelling reason why Section 13 is for the birds. We already have existing laws against truly criminal acts of slander, and that would be, of course, libel, slander, and defamation. Yet another reason why I would rather be tried in a true court of law where I actually stand a chance of having a fair trial, as opposed to going in front of a human rights tribunal where it's a 100% conviction rate. Unbelievable. For the Rebel.media, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. Hey folks, the Rebel has a new app. Please download that app and take the Rebel with you wherever you go.